Hello, my name is Michelle Embleton, and today I'm going to have a look at what is embryo donation and adoption. When is it recommended? Where do the donated embryos come from? And what are the advantages of embryo adoption and donation over egg donation? Then we'll have a look at how successful this treatment is and the costs involved. To finish, we'll have a look at some of the most frequently asked questions that our users have and answer them for you. Embryo adoption is the process by which a couple tries to become pregnant using the leftover embryos from another couple's IVF treatment. Embryo donation is the process by which these embryos are donated when they're no longer required, and embryo adoption is the recipient couple who will use these embryos for their own embryo transfer procedure. As this assisted reproduction technique requires the patients to give up the idea of passing their genetic load to their children, it does carry with it an emotional burden, and perhaps psychological counselling is a good idea when considering using this technique. The adoption of embryos is generally an alternative to using donor eggs or perhaps a double donor with donor eggs and donor sperm. And therefore it is indicated when we have infertility issues whereby the couples cannot use their own gametes, in single mothers who wish to become a mother without a male partner. They were going to need to either use donated sperm. If they have problems with their own eggs, they may look at embryo adoption as an alternative, and likewise with same-sex female couples. They may wish to look at embryo adoption if IVF with their own eggs is not possible. It can also be recommended in the case of a risk of passing on transmissible genetic diseases, which is not possible to test for with pre-implantation genetic diagnosis. Although PGD these days can test for many different genetically based illnesses, not all of them can be tested for. It could also be recommended in cases of repeated miscarriages. Generally, in any case where donation of egg and sperm, a double donor IVF treatment is recommended, the adoption and donation of embryos is an alternative and is indeed a more cost-effective alternative. In an IVF treatment, the woman will undergo ovarian stimulation in order to develop and mature several of her eggs, which will then be collected in an egg retrieval process. These will be fertilized with a previously prepared sperm sample in the laboratory, and the resulting embryos will be grown in culture for a few days and monitored carefully. When the time for the embryo transfer comes, the very best embryos will be selected and transferred to the woman's uterus. Usually only 1 or 2 eggs are transferred into the woman's uterus, which leaves us in many cases with the issue of what to do with the leftover embryos. The main options open to you here are 1, to vitrify, freeze, cryopreserve your embryos for future use, in case you need to repeat the embryo transfer if the treatment doesn't succeed the first time, or if your treatment is successful, perhaps to try for further children to add to your family in the future. If you know you do not wish to use these embryos in the future, or perhaps they have been in storage for a while, what can happen to these embryos? You can choose to donate them to other people who need to use them in their assisted reproduction journey. You could donate them to research to help further the field of assisted reproduction, or you can choose to have these embryos destroyed. Generally, patients do decide to freeze their leftover embryos for future use. So when the time comes for them to decide what to do with these embryos now they no longer require them, many will decide to give them up for embryo adoption. In order to be able to donate the embryos for reproductive purposes for other couples, the donor woman must be under the age of 35 and the embryos are very good quality. Both partners must be free of pathologies and infections, as would be the case for an egg and sperm donation. Embryo donation for reproductive purposes is becoming a more and more popular treatment, and there are several reasons why this is the case. The main advantages are that there is no waiting list. Once you have decided you are going to adopt embryos, you can go usually straight for the treatment. You will be matched in terms of phenotypical characteristics, your hair color, your eye color, your skin tone, to make sure that your children will look like you, and also immunological factors such as your blood groups. There is much less hormonal medication required for an embryo adoption, since the only hormonal medication you will need is to prepare the endometrium, which will usually require the use of estrogen and progesterones. This will prepare the endometrial lining for the embryo transfer, and when the implantation window is correct, the embryo transfer will take place. Fewer consultations are needed for embryo adoption rather than having an egg donation process, and also the time spent in the process is less. Usually, if you decide to adopt embryos within a year, if the embryo transfer is successful, you could be the proud parent of your newborn baby. Perhaps the biggest advantage in the cost. Embryo adoption is much, much cheaper than IVF with your own eggs, and a great deal cheaper than IVF with donor eggs. As the medication required for embryo adoption is also lower, less money will be spent on the hormonal medication. The success rates of embryo adoption largely depends on the quality of embryos themselves. And as such, the characteristics of the recipient woman do not influence the probability of the success in quite such a degree. Modern day techniques of embryo vitrification mean that after thawing, more than 90% of the embryos survive and remain in excellent condition in order to undergo embryo transfer. What we mustn't forget is that embryo adoption involves the adoption of embryos which are left over from another couple's IVF treatment. If another couple has been having the IVF treatment, it's because there are fertility issues, so this can influence the success rate. However, it may be that these embryos themselves and that other couple actually had donated eggs and donated sperm. These are facts that you will not be able to know, but this could actually improve the success rates. I have available the results of the Spanish Fertility Society's data collection for the year of 2020. And if we have a look at these statistics, we can see that the probability of getting pregnant per embryo transfer using embryo donation is 44.4%. When we look at the probability of live birth, this is 30.4%. Finally, just to reiterate that when undergoing the adoption of embryos, you must be sure that you are ready and willing to give up the idea of giving up your genetic load to your future children. So psychological counselling is advisable before going for embryo adoption. Embryo adoption is a much cheaper process than IVF or IVF using donor sperm and donor eggs. The price of embryo adoption and donation will depend on the clinic you are using, and for example in the United States can range between $2,500 to $4,000. Hormonal medication to prepare the endometrium for the embryo transfer is not usually included in the cost of the treatment, and this can amount to up to $1,000. Now we're going to have a look at some of the most frequently asked questions from our users and answer them for you. Are there any risks of incompatibility or rejection when using donated embryos? It is a remarkable feature of the human body that the woman's body does not reject an embryo from a natural conception, even though it is half foreign due to the fertilization of the sperm from the male partner. It's even more fascinating that the uterus will accept an embryo from donated sperm and donated egg. We are not exactly sure as to why the uterus doesn't have problems with incompatibility and rejection, but further research will be very interesting and is required on this subject. Is it possible to do embryo adoption in a natural cycle? Yes, it is possible. However, it is more likely that you will undergo endometrial preparation with estrogens and progesterone, so that the preparation of the endometrium can be monitored by ultrasound and the embryo transferred at the optimum time. Is embryo donation anonymous or open? Well, the answer to this question really will depend on what part of the world you live in. In many countries, such as the UK, Canada, Spain, and many European countries, embryo adoption will be a completely anonymous and altruistic process, as it is for sperm donation and egg donation. You will not be able to know the identity of the donor, and the donors will not know your identity. However, if you live in the United States, open adoption is possible. Indeed, interviews can even be set up in some cases to learn about the prospective parents or the prospective donors. In all cases of open adoption, do make sure that you have also sought legal advice to avoid any possible complications in the future of parental rights. We would like to hear about your experiences. Have you thought about embryo adoption? Please leave us a comment below. And we hope you have enjoyed this video and found it informative. And if you have, don't forget to press like and subscribe so you don't miss any of our future videos. And to finish, I'd like to remind you that, as always, I leave you in the description below a link to an article where you can read about this topic in more depth.